and new parties have come which have floundered in attempting to try to cope in the situation, and certainly in trying to live up to the aspirations with which so their supporters have been initially inspired. So we've got very appropriately speaking on this topic is Comrade Andros from Greece, who'll be focusing on particularly, I would imagine, on the experience of SYRIZA, but drawing broader conclusions in reviewing the situation with all of these parties. So over to you, please, Andros.
Thank you, comrades. You hear me good? Okay. I think I should start by saying what seems obvious, and Roger has also just referred to it, that all the organizations of the working class in one way or another are in crisis. The traditional political reformist, social democratic, labor, etc. organizations have lost their appeal. This has created also the communist parties lost their appeal. They went into crisis. This created a big vacuum, which enabled the emergence of what we call as new left formations, new parties of the left. Unfortunately, they have all capitulated, or nearly all, but especially the big ones like SYRIZA. So we are in a situation in which I would say that the left in general, or the political organizations of the working class in general, are probably in the worst crisis they have faced since the beginning of the 20th century, but maybe even since the end of the 19th century. Now, in this general process, SYRIZA has an exceptional position in the parties that sold out. I think that the basic facts are known, so I will very quickly remind the main ones. SYRIZA was an alliance of a small Euro-communist party in Greece with a number of organizations of the anti-capitalist left, small organizations, approaching the number of 10. It was quite a significant number. This fact in itself enabled SYRIZA to acquire a certain dynamic, but a small dynamic, in the course of the 2000s. This party, the Euro-Communist Party of Greece, and SYRIZA in its initial stages was in the region of 3–4% of the electorate in elections, polls, etc., for decades. It was able to pick up a bit and go to 6 or 7% in the course of the 2000s as a result of the fact that it emerged as a unifying process of various left groups, but this was not stable. Actually, SYRIZA skyrocketed from the 2008–9 global financial crisis, which hit Greece in 2010. In a matter of 2 years, it rose from 4.5% in 2010 to 17% in May 2012. So from 4 to 17% in a matter of 2 years. And then in 1 month, from 17% to 27%. Because the elections of May, there was a deadlock and they had to go to repeated elections in 1 month later. And it's important to note the speed with which things can develop in conditions of economic and social crisis when the working class and the rest of the population are massively attacked by the ruling class. In the case of Greece, not just the ruling class of Greece, but the Troika, the European Union, the IMF, and the European Central Bank. And by January 2015, what was expected was that SYRIZA would get the government, SYRIZA rose to 36.5% and took over the government from New Democracy. And this was received with enthusiasm by big players who thought that, okay, this is the end of the attacks, but not only nationally, but internationally also. The victory of SYRIZA was greeted with a lot of expectations, especially in Europe, but internationally as well. SYRIZA completely underestimated the pressure to be exerted on it by the ruling class and by Troika, by the European Union. They never understood and they never believed that the European Union was going to fully attack SYRIZA and kick them out of the Eurozone and push the Greek economy into a devastating crisis if SYRIZA did not abide by the demands of the Troika. I think you remember that SYRIZA was more or less treated as the Bolsheviks of Europe by the ruling classes in the rest of Europe and by the media of the ruling classes. SYRIZA had illusions, the leadership of SYRIZA, I mean, Tsipras specifically as an individual. They had illusions that they could convince the European Union that their policies were wrong and that they would change policies because of SYRIZA's convincing arguments. But they also believed that in case they couldn't convince them, then they would force them to change policies because they wouldn't dare to kick Greece out of the Eurozone because this would create a generalized crisis of the Eurozone. This was extremely naive on the part of SYRIZA's leadership. And they discovered, it's not only Tsipras who had these illusions, by the way, Varoufakis also. But Varoufakis had the honesty to admit that he was wrong in writing and in many speeches later on. When he said that I now realize the European Union cannot be transformed. So SYRIZA was pressurized, huge pressure was put on SYRIZA. The banks closed down. There was in order to avoid a bank run, the reserves were completely depleted because SYRIZA continued to pay the debt, although facing all this pressure, and we ended in the referendum of 2015, one of the most magnificent moments in the history of the Greek working class, because despite all this pressure and the threats that came from all sides, not only from the Greek ruling class, but internationally, that we will destroy you. I mean, this was the message. 61.5% of the population voted no against the Troika's demands. But hours after this historic development, SYRIZA, Tsipras capitulated completely. I want to say give you one element of the potential that existed in those conditions from a revolutionary point of view. In the course of the week of the referendum, there were 250 demonstrations in different cities of Europe, some cities also outside Europe, but essentially in Europe, in support of the Greek movement. 250 demonstrations supporting the Greek movement when the Greek people, when this was attacked by Troika. But Tsipras and the leadership of SYRIZA could not see this revolutionary potential that was created by these conditions, so they capitulated completely. And after 2015, the Greek movement went into a very serious lull. And it took about 5 years before we saw the first signs of recovery. In the last 2 or 3 years, we are beginning to see signs of recovery of the Greek movement, but we're still far away from, the best moments of the movement. I need to say a few things about Kasselakis. How did this person who landed from America, I mean, he didn't live in Greece. I mean, he's got no relation to Greek politics or Greece. He doesn't live in Greece. He lived in the US for ages. How did this ship owner, this millionaire, become a leader of a party that many years earlier was considered to be the Bolsheviks of Europe. It's because of the process by which SYRIZA was, what's the word? I'm missing the word. Anyway, the right-wing process in which SYRIZA was moving anyway, but also the fact that Tsipras has created a Bonapartist regime in the party, by which he was not elected by Congress, he was not elected by the National Committee of SYRIZA, he was not elected by the Congress of the delegate Congress of SYRIZA, but he was elected by the supporters of SYRIZA. So people were invited to go to the polls and vote for the president. This was nothing relation to this, to the traditions of the left, of course, and of the working class. This is a copy-paste of what we had in the US, the way they elect the Democratic and the Republican presidents. So 135,000 people went to this Congress that was going to elect SYRIZA. They paid €2. They voted for Kasselakis, and then they disappeared, and they never appeared again in the party. So Kasselakis is the result of Tsipras's policies. Is not the opposite of Tsipras's policies, as many in the left are trying to argue. And there is a good reason to suppose that Kasselakis was encouraged by Tsipras personally, but we don't have arguments to this. We cannot defend this. It's let's say it's a suspicion or a political estimate. And the sellout by SYRIZA had a big impact internationally because it was coupled with the sellout of a number of other similar formations, and I will come to them in the course of this contribution. But of course, the main question we need to answer is, how did this happen? How did this party develop like that? And why did it happen? And how can it be avoided in the future? And the problem, as I just said, is that SYRIZA is not the exception, but it's the rule when we are speaking about new left formations or new parties of the left. To go back some years, SYRIZA was one of the many examples of new left parties created in the past 3 decades as a result or as a reflection, one of the impacts of the collapse of Stalinism, which impacted on all the organizations of the working class, destruction of the communist parties, splits, fragmentation, move to the right, drastic move to the right of social-democratic parties, created a vacuum. And as is natural, when there is a vacuum, there is an attempt, there is an objective process by which the vacuum will be filled up. And tens of new left formations were created. And I will mention only a few of them, the more important perhaps. The Rifondazione Comunista in Italy, the PRC, the first one to be created from the very early 90s. Smaller attempts like the Scottish Socialist Party, the SSP in Scotland, Respect in Britain, NPA or NPA in France. These have disappeared. So the SSP, Respect, NPA are insignificant or non-existent at all. The Link in Germany, Podemos in Spain, around the time of SYRIZA's rise, the left bloc in Portugal, France Insoumise in France, PSOL in Brazil, FIT in Argentina, Antarcia in Greece, Turkish Workers' Party in Turkey. And apart from these new left parties, we had also new left phenomena, quite unexpected actually. The most prominent and the very important ones were the rise of Jeremy Corbyn to the leadership of the Labour Party and of Bernie Sanders in the US, in the Democratic Party, in the latter part of the 2010s. There was one significant difference between the new left formations and the traditional left or parties, traditional left parties or working class parties of the working class is that the new left formations never acquired the kind of roots in the working class that the old traditional organizations had. Of course, at the same time, so they were much more fragile organizations. Of course, at the same time, we should say that also the traditional social democratic similar parties like labor parties, etc., they also lost their roots and support, although they still maintain many of these parties, but especially the traditional ones, they maintain a sizable vote in society. Workers vote for them, but without inspiration and without great expectations. It's what we say, it's a lesser evil choice. Let's vote for them because the others are worse. The emergence of these parties raises some important questions or issues related to tactics, for example. So how do we approach these left parties? But I just put it on the table because I don't have time to develop it. And also another point which is important just to have in mind is that not all the new left formations are the same. We have new left formations which are clearly of a reformist character. We have new left formations which have a general anti-capitalist nature. And we also have a small number of new left formations which have a Trotskyist tradition. And at least in words, they speak about the necessity of revolution and socialism. I'm not developing this for reasons of time, but I just want to stress that when we say new left formations, we are not talking about a uniform phenomenon. There are serious differences between them. For example, in Greece, we had two new left formations. The SYRIZA was one of them, but also Antarsia, the anti-capitalist alliance, which is a significant factor in Greece, despite the many mistakes that they make. I want to raise the positive elements that exist in the objective situation so that we don't speak only about the general picture of gloom in the left. That's the general picture and that's the dominant picture. But within it, there are some examples that show the potential for revolutionary ideas. I'm not saying the potential for these organizations or for, to the answer I will mention, but I'm saying the potential for revolutionary ideas. Such examples, for example, are the FIT in Argentina. This is an alliance of Trotskyist organizations which gets 6% in elections in the polls. And it seems to be able to keep this percentage. It's PSOL in Brazil, which is an anti-capitalist formation, receiving in the region of 4.5% in a country of huge country like 130 million people, Argentina. It's SEP in Turkey, the Turkish Workers' Party, a newly created formation that got 1.7% in the last elections, elected for MPs, etc. And then is the example of Greece in the recent local elections, where the anti-capitalist left was actually forced, because of a law passed by New Democracy government, it was forced to collaborate and stand together in the elections. And it got an impressive 6% in Athens and Salonika, and very good percentage points where the anti-capitalist left collaborated, which was it's unprecedented for the Greek anti-capitalist left to be able to receive such percentage points. So I think it's important when we look at the situation to understand the two factors that I'm mentioning. On the one hand, the complete lack of perspective coming from left parties or traditional working class parties in general, old and new, creating a feeling of dead blind alley in society, as a result of which we have the rise of the far right that you are all very well aware of. But then on the other hand, we have some examples that show that there is potential for revolutionary ideas under certain conditions. And I think we have to keep it in mind and see to what extent we can utilize this. I don't want, by saying the latter, I don't want to create any kind of premature optimism, because the perspective of this new, let's call them revolutionary for reasons of, simplicity, let's put it like that. These new formations that speak in the name of revolution and socialism, and they get such high percentage points, I don't want to create any premature optimism, because the number is small. There are many contradictions in these formations, and things can be reversed. But having said this, we need to keep the potential which exists in society if revolutionary ideas are presented to it in the right way, and combined with the transitional program and the united front tactics. We speak a lot about SYRIZA, but actually the first new left formation to sell out was not SYRIZA, it was the PRC in Italy. And in a certain way, the betrayal of the PRC is of a greater magnitude than SYRIZA. The PRC was able to take down to the streets of Italy 1 million people, and they did it on many occasions. And the European left in general, the European social movements at the time of the 2000s, the decade of the 2000s, they looked towards Italy as an inspiration, as an example. Having achieved sizable support in society, the PRC entered government in the mid-2000s with the center-left, the Democratic Party of Italy, and that was the end of the PRC. They applied the policies of the ruling class in a milder form, of course, but the result was collapse of the PRC, the disintegration of the PRC, massive demoralization in the Italian working class, which has never been able since then. We are speaking about nearly 2 decades. The Italian working class has not been able to recover from that defeat, and there is no substantial party of the left in Italy today. But the PRC's disintegration and sellout had an impact in Europe because of the role that the PRC played in Europe. But it didn't cause many discussions internationally at that time, because very soon after the PRC's disintegration, we had the global crisis of 2008-9, and which put the globe on an entirely different basis. We had the Arab revolutions in North Africa. We had the massive struggles in Southern Europe. And we had the emergence of a new generation of new left formations. So it seemed that PRC sold out, disappeared, but history was advancing. In that period, we had the creation of SYRIZA, of Podemos, of the left bloc. Die Linke was on the rise. And soon afterwards, we had Corbyn and Sanders in Britain. Well, Podemos in Spain, Die Linke in Germany, the left bloc in Portugal, Corbyn in Britain, and Sanders in the US. And these developments, the creation of these new either parties or phenomena, because Corbyn and Sanders were phenomena, they were not new parties, they were phenomena inside the Labour Party of Britain and the Democratic Party of the US. they created a lot of optimism internationally in the second part of the 2010s, hoping that big changes were in the process of becoming real. But they all capitulated without exception in different ways. Podemos entered government with the Socialist Party in Spain. Crisis, splits, loss of support. The left bloc in Portugal, precisely the same process. The Link in Germany. They didn't enter the central government, but they entered local governments. They entered federal state governments together with the Social Democratic Party. Falling support, a big split recently. And Corbyn and Sanders capitulated in different way. When the time came, when they should have left their parties, left the Labour Party, and create a new Workers' Party in Britain, and leave the Democratic Party in the US and create a new Workers' Party in the US, they were not bold enough to do it, and the result was the general capitulation of all these formations. All of the above examples and many more that I don't have time to describe, develop, are important to show how the new left, or the so-called new left, whatever we like to, however we like to describe it, capitulated. But I think the most important examples, which had in the end a serious impact on the consciences of the working masses internationally, is the PRC in Italy, is SYRIZA in Greece, is Corbyn in Britain, and it's Bernie Sanders in the US. The most recent example comes from Brazil, is PSOL, which was one of the best known new left parties of an anti-capitalist character. They are there for about nearly 2 decades. They've just entered the government of Lula, and they will follow, PSOL will follow the road of the other left formations who did similar, applied similar policies. They will go into crisis, and the crisis will be reflected into different organizations inside PSOL, but because it's made up of many anti-capitalist organizations. The natural result of all this picture, of course, is massive demoralization in the working class masses, which they see no way out, neither from the old traditional left or traditional working class organizations, parties, nor from the new ones. And as I said before, this is laying the ground. This is butter on the bread. This is laying the ground for the right, the far right to rise, as we see it happening internationally. So what are the lessons from this? Why do I say that the left is faced with one of the worst crises in its history? Of course, this will change at a later stage. The wheel will turn, as we say, but it's taking time. It's not something that will be done in the next months or a couple of years. It's going to take time. And therefore, it's very important to draw the lessons of why is it happening, and how to avoid this picture. The essential reason for this, for the crisis of the organizations of the working class, is the fact that all these organizations that we have mentioned, they have abandoned the program and the struggle for a socialist transformation of society. And when the left and when the organization of the working class do this, they will go into crisis. There is no question about it, of one form or another. And this brings us to the tasks. I want to repeat again what I said before about the potential for radical revolutionary left alternatives in societies, looking at the picture internationally. I remind the examples of what I said about the FIT in Argentina with 6%, although that's a quite sectarian organization, actually. Of the 6% of the anti-capitalist left in Greece in the recent local elections. of the vote that I'm ending in 3 minutes, Roger, if you want. Yeah. And the other examples I mentioned, that 4.5% by PSOL in Brazil last year, and the recent elections in Turkey, where the Turkish Workers' Party, which is a very, very new formation, they got 1.7%, which is the highest vote for any socialist party since the 1960s in Turkey. So the task we face with, from the minute that we understand that whenever the left abandons the socialist program, under whatever pretext, for example, PSOL in Brazil saying we have to join Lula's government because we have to face Bolsonaro and the rise of the far right. Whatever pretext is used, the left will go into crisis and into demise when they capitulate to the demands and to the needs, actually, of the ruling class, whatever form this whatever form this takes. And therefore, the basic task that we are faced with, not us, but in front of the working class, actually, the task that the working class is faced, but we are part of it and we are fighting for this, is to build parties that will be able, that will adhere to a socialist program consistently, that will refuse to enter bourgeois governments of one form or another, and will refuse to capitulate to the pressures of the ruling class. We should know that the vacuum that we are seeing today in the left internationally at some stage is going to be filled by some kind of formations, one kind or another. And there is no automatic rule by which the new formations will be better than the previous ones, and better than the previous ones, etc., etc. There's no automatism in this. It's a question of struggle of living forces like ours. So new formations will come into existence, and new developments inside existing parties, sometimes traditional, but even new left parties. There will be developments there as well. And we have to have our eyes open and follow flexible tactics, be able to intervene in time, to take part in such developments, to assist such processes to develop, and in this way to help in the accumulation of forces that will have a consistent socialist program and a consistent socialist orientation. Just to end, I think we need to raise high our demands and our struggle for new working class parties. That's a need internationally on clear socialist and revolutionary principles, which of course should be brought together in a new socialist international organization, because we cannot achieve these targets on a national basis. We need to fight it out on the international level. Thank you, comrades.
Oh, thank you very much, Andrew. That was a really comprehensive and penetrating analysis of the situation. I'm sure there'll be a lot of reports and contributions from comrades here. Can you indicate if you want to speak? I would like to put myself on the list, but as chair, I'll give priority to other comrades. Yes, Kieran.
Yes, no, I'll start. It's a very comprehensive lead off, a lot of ground to cover. It is difficult to cover so many different national arenas and so many different experiences. And I have thought for some time, and it's a question of resources, but somebody somewhere on the left needs to draw a more comprehensive balance sheet, which would mean breaking it down country by country, experience by experience, but also trying to draw together some of the lessons, that overarching lessons, in the form of a series of articles. And it's something we should consider, perhaps, if we have the resources, the personal resources over the course of a year, a series of articles, and then could be drawn together, perhaps in book form, even if the book is an ebook, because out there must be many thousands or tens of thousands of militants and activists who perhaps are not in a state of despair, but they wonder, what went wrong? Why did the new initiatives fail so many times? So I've just got 2 points to make. A general point I'll come back to, but I'll just maybe start with some comments about the situation in Ireland. Because usually when we discuss new left formations, Ireland isn't considered in the discussion. And I'm not referring to Sinn Féin here, because Sinn Féin, in any real sense of the term, are not a left party. They're a very different formation. We can discuss, we have discussed on other occasions. But the left in Ireland, the left that is described frequently in the media as the far left, have scored notable electoral successes over a period of now nearly 30 years, which has never really been properly analysed, in my view. That work was led by comrades who was the CWI, the Socialist Party in Ireland, in the south, with the first councillor elected in 1991, so 30 years ago. And from the CWI tradition, TDs, members of parliament, have been elected in 5 different constituencies. So it's 5 different large urban working class areas, 4 in Dublin and 1 in Cork. And then at a certain point, the SWP, the Socialist Workers' Party, who previously had attacked electoral work, they entered the arena and they established People Before Profit as a broad platform on a much more opportunist basis than any of the campaigns of the Socialist Party. And they've been successful in having 3 TDs elected. So 8 TDs, 8 members of parliament, in a Dáil, a parliament of about 165, 168 members. Jimmy will correct me, around that number. So 1 in 20 from the far left. And that has been maintained for quite a long period of time. And it's not just that the comrades have been successful electorally, but they've been involved, and they include the SWP comrades to an extent, in a number of broad mass movements of the working class, not through the trade union movement, but outside the trade union movement, the anti-water charges campaign, the anti-bin tax campaign. So it's been very important work. And in that work, when I was previously in the Socialist Party, we discussed repeatedly the question of what steps we should take with the elected representatives we had in order to act as a spark or a detonator to create a larger, broader formation. And steps were taken. So, for example, currently the TDs that do sit are part of what's called Solidarity. And Solidarity was the umbrella, the attempt to set up a new left formation. But without going into the detail, there's a lot of detail. Those attempts have been unsuccessful. And I think that's something that's replicated in other places. So new formations can come together, often on the basis of the existing left drawing together. Large votes can be won, 5%, 10% of the vote. If the electoral system is favourable, as it is in Ireland, that means seats are won. But there has not been a move into the new formations of the working class. There's been a generation where activists come forward and become involved in single issue campaigns or working class campaigns, but they don't take the necessary next steps to join a party or to initiate a party, become involved in left party politics. And that's one of the, I think, key lessons over the last period, the last 20 years. One of the key puzzles that we have to try and disentangle. Why is that the case? Why do workers vote for left alternatives? Why do they become involved in broader struggles, but they don't take the next steps, as we took the next steps, many of us in the 1970s or 60s or the 1970s or the 1980s, and became involved in left politics? So the Socialist Party in Ireland was not able to grow beyond approximately 300 members, and the membership was flat for 2 decades, despite the fact of having very prominent members of parliament. So just my final broader point just comes back to this question of, the anti-party mood we talk about, the difficulty in drawing new layers into activity. And I think all of this is still the cloud, the overhang of the collapse of Stalinism. I think that's the only explanation that adds up and that makes sense. And it may be more than 30 years since the collapse of Stalinism or the collapse of the Soviet Union, but the Stalinism, communism dominated the workers' movement in many ways for decades.
Can comrades please mute themselves if they're speaking?
Yes, and we're still, I think, living with the aftermath of that. And that on the back of that, of course, all the defeats of the workers' movement in Britain, the defeat of the miners' strike, multiple defeats of the workers' movement that's continued. And so when the new left formations come into the political arena, there's a lack of confidence. There's a lack of confidence in ideas. There's a lack of confidence that anything can be delivered outside the constraints of the system. And so what we have to do, groups like ourselves, is we have to act as the memory of the movement. So we're the memory of the workers' movement. It's that we can draw conclusions because we can look back to the past. We can base ourselves on the best ideas of the past and draw conclusions for today and the future. But to do that, we need to fully analyse the full experience of the new left formations, where it went wrong, everywhere it went wrong, in order to prepare for the future.
All right. Thank you, Kieran. Matthew.
Oh. Okay. If I can get my camera to work. Okay, thanks, comrades. No, I think he's right. I mean, I think it's obviously an interesting phenomenon. I mean, from my point of view, I was a local organiser, branch organiser for the Scottish Socialist Party in these parts, which is a very interesting formation. I think that, I mean, there is a basic issue here, and the real question is: are people, I mean, in political activities, revolutionaries, there to administer bits of the capitalist state, and in what fashion? I mean, I think that there's an issue. I mean, certainly the question really becomes one, as put actually, of course, particularly the Second International, which is the question: well, do you enter a bourgeois government? To which obviously the answer was no. But I mean, all of these formations, of course, haven't got to that point. They all said yes. So of course, as the comrade just said, this then leads on to crisis, because obviously they're then stuck with administering the requirements of the ruling class in a capitalist state. I mean, I think that there's an issue in terms of things like local government, and I think that this bears further discussion in terms of how to behave in terms of local government, councils and so on and so forth, which people obviously could reasonably expect to get elected to, and the rest of it. And what would you do in these circumstances? And how would you carry out a struggle? That's the question. I mean, in terms of the Scottish Socialist Party, the evolution, of course, was away from the Socialist Party, of course, as comrades know, and actually, of course, is it towards Scottish nationalism. I mean, the thing is that there was agreement, personally, between the leaders, those who became the leaders of the Scottish Socialist Party, and Peter Taft, to change the position from an opposition to nationalism to a support for Scottish nationalism. Which is quite extraordinary, really. There was no discussion. It was merely done. And of course, this then, of course, becomes an issue in terms of, well, are you actually a socialist, or are you just merely in favour of the creation of a new capitalist state? And this was the debate we always had with these comrades. What are you here for, comrades? I mean, are you in favour of the creation of a new capitalist state, and playing part in administering that? And it became quite clear, obviously, that that's what they wanted. And the point was, of course, ultimately, what they did want was a deal, if they could get one, which they couldn't at the time, with the Scottish National Party, which was the dominant element in Scottish nationalism. That intersected, of course, with a section of the working class which was looking for some alternative to the crap politicians and crap politics it was being offered, and therefore were prepared to vote for something which looked credible and to the left. So you did see this extraordinary, explosion of people, and you could, hold meetings of very large size and talk to people of all sorts, who would take you seriously as a political activist to a much greater degree than any other political formation certainly in Scotland in the last 30, 40 years. However, of course, I mean, it was deeply unstable. And the problem was, of course, that the politics weren't sustainable. clearly with that sort of all of those intersecting tendencies, it couldn't sustain itself, and it blew itself apart in the most extraordinary fashion. In a process in which, of course, it was fairly much personalised around Tommy Sheridan, and in which people learned very little. And it was deeply, as the comrades also pointed out quite correctly, that this process is generally quite demoralising. And takes people a time to recover from. If indeed, of course, generally, of course, it takes out, a generation of activists, and you have to wait for another generation who have not gone through that sort of demoralising experience, because obviously it takes them out of activity, through various processes of demoralisation and the rest of it. So, in those terms, yeah, I mean, it needs to go through all that experience, but there are certain things that, as has been said, I mean, much of it is through the tradition of Stalinism, but also, bits of the tradition of other tendencies as well. Thanks.
Oh, thanks, Matthew. Thomas.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Andrew for a very quite accurate description of the political landscape in the working class movement. And I think that it's interesting. Most interesting is that he managed to join the various expressions of working class militancy in various countries in a way that I would quite agree with, and I think they could give us a clue of what's going on. I mean, the connection between SYRIZA, between the Arab revolutions, the movement of Corbyn and Sanders, are phenomena of our epoch. What I would like to do, though, was to place this within the framework of the period we are living through, which is a very important stage of capitalist development. And it's something that I consider very, very important, in the sense that since the 2008 economic crisis, we are living in a different sort of capitalist structure. We are not anymore in what we have been used to live through in the 20th century. It's the collapse of another attempt on neoliberalism, in fact, to make capitalism viable. And it is this underlying structure that creates the crisis in the various countries and the crisis in the left as well as the right-wing parties. We also should realize that elections and parliaments and the normal political democratic procedures are no longer what they used to be. They don't correspond to anything that came to be known as democracy in the 20th century. It's in fact the manipulation of political systems by the large monopolies and large conglomerates that really rule the world. We also think we should realize that we are in the middle of a revolutionary period. We don't realize it, but things are not normal. And all these movements are revolutions in the making, which we didn't manage to see them in time. When SYRIZA was a revolution, becoming a government was a revolution. It wasn't a Marxist revolution because they didn't have that perspective. But that's how the Russian Revolution started, and that's how Lenin managed to see through what was going on and change even the policies of his own party with a very hard struggle within the party. And if Lenin didn't manage to tell the policies of the Bolshevik Party, we don't know what would happen, what we would be speaking about today. And this is the sort of thing that we should always have in mind when we talk about what are our tasks. I mean, Marxists don't start revolutions. Marxists can intervene in revolutions, but revolution starts spontaneously from the people, and we have seen them happening again and again and again. SYRIZA was a revolution. Corbyn was a revolution. The Arab Spring was a revolution. And the Arab Spring is very important in the sense that it shows how it can spread from one country to another very quickly. SYRIZA is very important because we can see there how Marxists could intervene, but they didn't. They didn't because they didn't exist at the time in Greece with such power as to intervene. So when we talk about what we should do, I think we should forget about the 20th century thinking, start building slowly a mass workers' party. This is not how it's going to happen now. Revolution is going to take place there, and we will have to intervene. So it's a program that we should be after. A program on the one hand, and the ability to speak to each other within the movement is the next thing, because the solidarity of the working class, the united front of the left is one part, the program is the other. So as long as we know what we are doing, as long as we have a program and we know what should be done, it doesn't matter if we are a small or a large organization, but it does matter if we can speak to the rest of the left and if we can find ways to intervene in the events that will start unfolding. I think we should get rid of all of our sectarianism, and I think we should get rid of all of our reformist illusions. Revolution is going to happen. We have to intervene there. We have to have a program, and we have to be together, all of us.
Oh, thank you, Thamo. If there's nobody else who's actually in the queue, I would like to speak. If anybody else wants to come first, though. Yes, Nicholas.
Hi, I will contribute two things. First, I will share an article, but it looks like I can't really share in the general chat. This article is called "The Crisis and the Collapse of the International Socialist Organization." It's written a while ago when that organization collapsed. So importantly, I think one thing that I will echo of is that it is very important in order to combat the kind of the constant pull into opportunism and you know, the betrayal to our principle. It is quite important to have an ecosystem of. It seems that it might be a very important thing to have. To have an ecosystem of different like-minded but competing organizations, such that each of those organizations can perform the comradely criticism against each other when one is showing signs of problematic deviation. And that seems to be, so this article was analyzing. Here's some noise.
Can everybody mute themselves if they're not the speaker, please?
Yeah, okay, anyway. So yeah, the article was talking about the Argentina left and exactly the FIT, the different parties within that alliance. They were able to perform inter-organizational criticism, and and the end result is that we saw that they are relatively successful as a Trotskyist organization across the world. And I think that's something we can, maybe it's not very easy to replicate elsewhere, because sometimes in a lot of places it's hard to avoid being the only trust-based organization. But I think that will be something to look out for, and especially to basically, so what that means is like we should really try to be commonly as possible towards other organization and try to combat sectarianism. And because that's the best way to make sure we can build a healthy ecosystem. And the other thing that I will contribute is that, yeah, just as the previous speaker, previous comrades mentioned Arab Spring, a lot of those international new left movements comes in waves. So Arab Spring, the pink wave, the pink tide, and maybe we're having the second pink tide. The problem is that a lot of time it is those tides are asynchronous. They are not synchronized across different regions in the world. And that is quite, it's unfortunate. It's an unfortunate factor of course, the uneven developments of the world. So like right now we are in Europe, we are probably seeing the rise of far right. Meanwhile, this is in contrast, the Latin America is seeing somebody are still arguing, probably still debating whether second pink tide is coming. But you can maybe say, okay, limited success there. So it's like things don't always line up, and that creates problem, and that creates contradiction because we cannot easily spread the momentum of one region into another, because it seems like the pendulum are moving in different, the pendulum at different phases in different regions. And I think that I don't know how to solve that. Maybe there's another solution to that. But maybe that's also a sign, a symptom of the international left not being truly international, that we don't truly have international cooperation between those regions. And I think if we can somehow synchronize things up, it will be much better to build a new left, like a new left's wave, and also in the same theme, an ecosystem that will strengthen each other. Okay, that's it.
Okay, thank you. Right, if there's nobody else in line, I would like to speak now. Is somebody willing to take over the chair? It's I recommend it, otherwise I might not go on for too long. Who's going to step up?
I will.
Okay, thank you, Dave. All
Now,
right.
how long do you want, Roger?
Well, I don't think any of us should speak for more than 5 minutes. But
All right, I'll stop you after 5 minutes.
I'm sure I can buy you a drink. We'll. Okay, I just wanted to say, look, in 2012, Wynne produced a pamphlet, and I'd like to quote from it. This was really at the beginning of this process. SYRIZA had been formed, but there was not much else on the horizon. And we said that we predicted the development of similar parties, and we wrote, it will necessarily be a broad, all-encompassing forum in which all forces participate, which regard themselves as opposed to the dictatorship of the corporations. It will bring the anti-capitalist youth and many of the existing single-issue protest lobbies into alliance with mainstream organizations and new fighting units of struggle. It will be built not on words and manifestos, but on practical campaigns. It will be a vibrant arena of democratic debate in which organized platforms contend. No single tendency will dominate a resurgent party of the left. It will be a coalition of platforms. It would be a hothouse of debate. It could not overthrow capitalism. It couldn't complete the task, but it would be a hothouse of debate, a workshop in which rival theories and strategies could be tested out, selected, and sharpened. And I think that is quite a good description of what happened with SYRIZA and many more. It was it resembled in some ways those transient parties of the 1930s, like the ILP, when it split from Labour in Britain in 1931, the German SAPD, the Spanish POUM, dynamic, fluid, volatile formations, but they were intrinsically unstable in a process from the outset of flux and transition, representing a kind of bridge between reformism and revolution, and behaving almost like radioactive elements with a limited half-life, fleetingly seeking out a stable foundation, and soon either subsiding into reformism, achieving a revolutionary mission, or more probably fizzling out. Now, many people at that time, many Trotskyists, and the same thing happened with the new wave of these left parties in the recent period, that they just dismissed them, scoffed haughtily and said, oh, they're just mere reformist parties. Trotsky made this comment: there can be no more devastating mistake in politics than to operate with ready-made conceptions that relate to yesterday and to yesterday's relationship of forces. A mistake of exactly the same kind is made by those comrades who, in appraising the Socialist Party, that was the French Socialist Party, themselves operate with the ready-made formulas of yesterday: reformism, Second International, political support of the bourgeoisie. And Trotsky said this: are these definitions correct? Yes and no. More no than yes. Naturally, it would be a crude mistake to assert that nothing has remained of reformism and patriotism in the party since this split, but it is no less a mistake to talk about it as about the social democracy in the old sense of the word. And he went on in similar terms. Now, many people in relation to SYRIZA, we had arguments on our then discussion list that we had at the time with people who said, "Oh, SYRIZA, the reformist party, it will betray," and so on. And of course, it did betray, and absolutely. To what extent it betrayed, I want to give another quote in a minute. But the point is, at the outset of the rise of SYRIZA, it was completely sectarian and self-defeating to simply dismiss it as another reformist party and so on. The point was to seize on the opportunity that existed then, to seize on the possibilities that were there. Now, it's true, when it came to within a few months of SYRIZA taking power, it committed the most spectacular and most overt kind of betrayal. I'd like to quote again. This is from Varoufakis's memoirs. He was by that time the former economics minister in the SYRIZA government, and he talked about what happened when the referendum results came through, when the SYRIZA government, Tsipras, had no idea what to do. They were just in a completely impossible situation, squeezed between the aspirations of the masses and the dictatorship of the banks. And they had no possible alternative but say, well, let's have a referendum, secretly hoping that the electorate would give them an alibi to capitulate. What happened? Varoufakis described the scene in the conference room on referendum night as he waited with other ministers for the results. And this is what he said: when the final number flashed up on the screen, 61.31% for no, that is for rejection of the terms of the bank, in a turnout of 62.5%, I jumped up and punched the air, only to realize that I was the only one in the room celebrating. And he then had a discussion with Tsipras. He says, when I entered his office, Alexis at Tsipras stared at me and said we had messed up badly. I decided to put it to him straight. Would he honour the no vote, or was he about to throw in the towel? At that point, Alex confessed to something I had not anticipated. He told me that he feared a goody fate awaited us if we persevered. That was a reference to the execution of 6 politicians and military leaders in 1922. In other words, pure cowardice. He said we might be shot. Alexis then began to insinuate that something like a coup might take place. Now, this was, outright outright capitulation and outright betrayal. And the same would have happened with any of these parties. If Corbyn, we have to say it, of course, we all have a soft spot and affection for Jeremy Corbyn. But if he had won the leadership, well, if he did win the leadership, if he had won the election and became Prime Minister, he would obviously have capitulated in one way or another, because we saw what happened. He wouldn't even confront the right wing of his own party. He wouldn't even confront his own MPs. How far less could he be relied on to confront the forces of imperialism and capitalism on a world scale? And the same thing. The only choice, in other words, when it comes to it, is either internationalism and revolution or capitulation. There is no middle way, and therefore I think it's very important we learn those lessons. There will be many such formations coming up again, and we have to be prepared for them. First of all, to operate in a sympathetic and comradely way to the people and the forces that are pouring into those parties with some expectations and some hopes, but also to be absolutely clear that these parties are absolutely ephemeral, and that unless the opportunity is seized, and unless we can build out of that Marxist revolutionary forces, then the whole opportunity is going to be dissipated and wasted. So thanks.
Time to wind up. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I'll wind up. That's it.
All right, I'm passing the chair back to you.
Right, Nigel, you're next.
Yeah, thanks, Roger. Just a brief contribution. Yeah, I agree with your comments around Corbyn. Couldn't even face up to his own MPs. It was very disappointing. But we supported him very actively throughout his time, and fought very hard for Corbyn to try and persuade the movement to move to the left. But the movement and his supporters weren't listening. We weren't allowed to have political discussion. We weren't allowed to challenge the orthodoxy around the Momentum group. And so the political discussion was closed down, and we were seen as, as attacking Corbyn when we were trying to be constructively critical. That brings me on to a very important point, that criticism is something that is really difficult in the movement. If you go to an XR, Extinction Rebellion meeting, for example, it's absolutely prohibited, political discussion or really critical views. In fact, someone said to me yesterday in a climate change meeting, I thanked her for her criticism of my contribution to the meeting, and she said it wasn't a criticism. It wasn't a criticism. I said, well, no, I took that very positively. I've learned something from what you've said, but it was a criticism. No, it wasn't. And it was like there was this kind of thing about this word criticism that it can't be allowed. What I'm trying to get at there is a kind of mood away from disagreement and from being able to have a comradely difference of opinion. And this is something we're fighting very hard to build into our tradition in Internationalist Standpoint now, and I'm very confident about that with Win as well, and other groups. That we have to have a critical, but constructive, comradely, critical perspective on things, and we will disagree from time to time. I was talking actually in this climate change. It was a meeting on climate change and the cost of living crisis and how they connected, and I was talking about the big problem being capitalism there, obviously. But there were, bourgeois, like reformist speakers as well. And the room was full of, reformist parties and so on and so forth. And there was a speaker called Alan Simpson, who was an advisor to John McDonnell when he on climate change, and also to Ed Miliband as well. And I had a chat with him afterwards. Really nice guy. And he was saying that when he was advising Ed Miliband said to him, "Oh, you're the scary one. Now, you couldn't meet a less scary guy than this Alan Simpson." And you're the scary one. He said, "Well, why is that?" He said, "Well, you've come to talk to me about climate change. And then this Alan Simpson was saying, but the thing was, Nigel, that he had 100 corporate lobbyists also speaking to him, and I was the only one with a different perspective. So that's the balance of the, if you like, the way that the big business and the way that the elite bombards people in positions of political power with lobbying. So they're up against quite a massive process of lobbying when they get into positions of political power. I do think there was a very interesting period, and that is when the climate change movement started up. And I think I think we need to remind ourselves of that. That was a very exciting developments. Certainly from my perspective in the UK, talking to youth striking, youth wanting to discuss things, working with me, my trade union colleagues to provide safe spaces for them to meet, talking about ideas, developing thought. XR came into the picture and they put a brake on the discussions. They were not interested in the kind of discussions that a lot of the youth were wanting to take place. And there was attempts to put a brake on more militant actions by the youth, by the trade unions. In fact, I won't go into it now, but it was, it's quite convoluted and complicated. But the trade union themselves were very concerned about the youth's, approach to being critical of local factories. It was the use of palm oils at the chocolate factory in York, where I was at the time, which is a massive factory making chocolate and use a lot of palm oil. But that was something we could talk to the young people about, not tell them what to think, but encourage them to kind of find their ideas in a safe space where they could talk to each other, not listen to me or listen to other trade union comrades, but talk to each other and then talk to us if they wanted to. And they did, and we set up a little group where we talked about all sorts of things. So I'd like to just take us back to that, because that was quite an interesting thing. But what I also noticed was the Fridays for Future thing was very quickly infiltrated. I would use the word infiltrated by people nobody knew who they were, that took a kind of bogus authority and called themselves an organization, set up a national coordinating organization out of nowhere with no authority, and gave themselves the authority, so that young people were looking to that national coordinating organization for, if you like, a lead on things. Now, that is something that's created out of the state. There's no question about that. The British state's been doing that since the 16th century, and especially since the 19th century, since the general strike in the 1840s, in the 19th century. So it's very it's very adept at kind of that, and it has a lot of skills. So I just like raising those points, because they do reflect on New Left formations and the pressure they're under. There's the state itself using its if you like, agents, and in Britain that's well documented, as Roger will know and other British comrades will know, using its agents to undermine the movement, the military, the police, and so on and so forth. In terms of military intelligence, it's something I know quite a lot about, and that sort of thing. So it's a complex thing. So we're up against it in that sense. So the attempts we're trying to make with WIN and ISP to bring groups together, so we're all talking to each other, listening to each other, and as comrades were saying, so that we're talking internationally, as Themis was indicating, we're talking internationally, we can communicate really fluidly that way, are really, really significant. And I think we're moving in the right direction in that regard. Thank you.
Thanks, Nigel. Steve.
Yeah, I was going to first say, that part of that is possible because of the development of communication technology. I mean, these platforms, Zoom and others, offer the working class globally an opportunity they've never had before, to have workers around the world having discussions and on politics, on the working class issues. I think we're in globally an epoch of revolution and counter-revolution. That's the world we're in. And I think that the question is, how is the working class going to respond how is it going to organize internationally to deal with the threat of fascism and currents that will destroy the world, as well as the climate crisis. And it seems to us in the United States, the United Front Committee for Labor Party, we need to build a united front perspective towards uniting those workers and activists around class issues that we can take forward. And whether it's organizing a union or against racism, against the fascist movement, building united fronts, having discussion and debates, and also the political fight for a workers' party, a mass democratic workers' party in the United States. But the same situation is in South Africa and many other countries. In Britain, there's no mass working class parties, except I would say in Argentina, where there's a left working class party, united front of left parties, Trotskyist parties. So I think that struggle now around united fronts should also expand globally, obviously. We have to build a world working class party, and having a platform that allows a discussion debate is critical. And one of the problems in the United States is that there are Trotskyist parties or come from Trotskyist traditions who say they're for a labor party, a mass labor party, but really are not. They're for recruiting to their own organization. And I think that's a big political obstacle. And I think we are trying to overcome that, and to say to these organizations, if you're for a mass workers' party, a mass labor party, you have to work towards one. And it's going to include people who you have disagreements with. And I think there is a fear among these sectarians, and I would call them sectarians, of a real discussion debate within the working class. We want a full discussion debate within the working class so there can be a political development. And that means breaking with sectarianism and acting together on concrete issues that you can have unity on. So I see that as a perspective for us in the United States and internationally in this big political vacuum that we face globally.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Nicholas, I think your hand up is a legacy, unless you want to come in again. No, I think, is there any other comrades who want to speak? Andrew, perhaps you could come in, and that might stimulate more discussion again. Andrew?
Yeah, I can say a few things. I should start by apologizing to Kieran and the Irish comrades for not mentioning Ireland. It was a bad omission on my part, because Ireland is really an important example of how organizations of the anti-capitalist left, with reference to revolutionary Marxism and Trotskyism, they were able for quite a while to, and they still have an important impact in the country, intervention and still members in parliament. I could add a few things about Greece. Roger reminded me of a few things. When he said that they went for the referendum, hoping actually that they would be defeated in the referendum. It sounds a bit strange, but this was really the aim of Tsipras's leadership and government. They wanted an excuse so as to retreat, capitulate. And they thought that because of the terror campaign that the Greek population, the Greek workers and youth were faced with, they would lose the referendum. They would not vote for no. There would be a majority against voting no, if you understand what I mean. They would accept that we cannot do anything. We have to give up. And they were shocked by the outcome. Because actually, it was like challenging the Greek people. And this brought to the surface the revolutionary traditions and the great working class struggle traditions of the Greek working class. So they felt that this is a battle, we go into the battle. And that's how 62% of the population voted for no to Troika's terms. Have in mind that there was not one single party in Greece which supported no, and that even the TUC, the official unions, they supported yes. So it was a kind of a rise of the Greek working class against all of the political establishment parties, left, so-called left and right. And even the Communist Party, they didn't call for a no, they called for abstention. That was a very important moment, as I said before, in the history of the Greek working class. Now, the discussions about SYRIZA, I think Kiran made a very good point at the beginning, saying that all of these experiences should be put down on paper, you know, or at least electronically, so that it goes from generation to generation. Because we don't have the resources to do this work, and therefore our voice is kind of weak. The voices of the bourgeois and the reformists of the Stalinists, they dominate. The fact is that the left inside SYRIZA was quite strong. The left inside SYRIZA used to get 1/3 of the Congress votes. That's a massive amount. But the problem of the left inside SYRIZA, which of course was very unhomogeneous, you had Trotskyists, you had Maoists, you had ex-Stalinists, you had, you know, confused people. As I said, there were something like nearly 10 different groups or currents inside SYRIZA that comprised what can be described as the left of SYRIZA. The problem with the left of SYRIZA was that it couldn't act together. It could not act together. There was no unity in what they did, and there was no common understanding of what should be done. So when SYRIZA sold out, although at that time there were about 8 or 9 splits out of SYRIZA, because it's a massive process of evacuation of SYRIZA by the left people. And they created Popular Unity, which in the beginning of September, the elections were held in the beginning of October, they got 10% in the polls, and in 1 month, they managed to go below 3% and didn't enter parliament. And the problem was subjective. It was not objective. The potential again was there. But they behaved in such bureaucratic, top-down, undemocratic way that all the people that went to Popular Unity to see what we can do now, they left the next day. It sounds a bit oversimplified, but it's a cost we pay in Greece because sectarianism is very deeply ingrained in the Greek left, anti-capitalist left, etc. And this has to do with the fact that Stalinism has very strong roots in the country, and most of the anti-capitalist left, they are split off from the Communist Party, which is Stalinist. But I will also give you an example of with Antarcia, the Anti-Capitalist Alliance, which shows how sectarianism, how catastrophic it can be. Because when SYRIZA came into being, every serious left organization had to have some kind of intervention inside SYRIZA. And it was possible because SYRIZA was very open. So all of the, I would say, the serious anti-capitalist left, we had some kind of intervention, one kind of another inside SYRIZA. But Antarcia was independent, away from SYRIZA, refusing to collaborate with SYRIZA because any collaboration with reformism is a crime. This is the traditional sectarian attitude. But there is one example which is not very well known, and I haven't seen it written everywhere, anyway. I mean, outside Greece. I mentioned at the beginning that in May 2012, SYRIZA got 17% in the elections. And in June 2012, that's 1 month later, it got 27% of the vote. So it was skyrocketing, and it was clear it was going for government. In this month, SYRIZA was in its very left phase at that time. They invited Antarcia because they knew it was going to be a few percentage points up or down who was going to win the government, New Democracy or SYRIZA. And Tsipras offered Antarcia 5 MPs without conditions. So we stand together, we will go for the same list. I guarantee for you publicly, you have 5 MPs who will be independent. They wouldn't be part of SYRIZA. They would have their own group inside parliament, and they would function in the way they would like. And just imagine, in the conditions of 2012, 13, 14, 15 in Greece, if the anti-capitalist left had 5 members of parliament, what kind of powerful voice it would be able to attain by using the resources of the parliament and its ability to go to the people representing a parliamentary force. And they rejected it. They said we don't collaborate with the reformers. And they threw away 5 MPs. It's one of these things that you cannot laugh, you can only cry, and you say, well, this is a crime. There's no other way to describe it. And Garcia had the naive impression that the day after SYRIZA would betray, because all of us in the anti-capitalist left, we knew that at some stage SYRIZA would sell out. They had the impression that the SYRIZA masses would just go to Antarcia. But if you don't apply the United Front, the masses will not approach you. I mean, if you refuse any kind of collaboration with a mass formation like SYRIZA, on what basis would the masses of SYRIZA come to you when their leadership betrays them? They would be demoralized and go home. I don't know if there's going to be more discussion, but as a final point, I would like to say that yes, the situation is very contradictory. There are elements and revolutionary potential in the situation, and there are many difficulties, despite the objective situation, which allows the potential, because there are very serious problems subjectively with the anti-capitalist or Marxist left. But we need to intervene in these conditions. I mean, this is the reality that we are faced with. If we want to build powerful Marxist organizations, which this is what we want, and because this is the only way to build mass revolutionary parties at a later stage and to have victorious revolutions, we need to approach developments with a very open mind, follow developments inside existing left organizations, and be able to intervene in time to prepare the Marxist cadre and strengthen it, but also have an open mind about processes outside mass or semi-mass organizations. And there are many such processes in our epoch. And take bold initiatives. Sometimes it requires to take bold initiatives, and if we miss the opportunity, it will be gone for good. So with this approach and with, tactical issues, other tactical issues, but also the way we understand the United Front and the way we understand relations between revolutionist organizations, like the ones that are here, like WIN, like International Standpoint, and individual comrades, I think we can make significant steps in the coming period.
Okay, thank you, Andro. Are there any other comrades who want to come into the discussion? Ian.
I think Nicholas might want to as well, but I don't know if that's
Nicholas, I think it's
I forgot to. No, I forgot to.
All right. I'm sorry, I've come in extremely late. I hope, as usual, this will have been recorded and I'll catch up later. But just in the little I did catch on the Greek situation specifically, I had a couple of questions about where we are now. First of all, a wee contribution that these things can go more than one way, because SYRIZA and Podemos seemed at a certain stage to be extremely similar organizations. Podemos actually copycatting SYRIZA in a lot of ways, which turned out to be not such a smart tactic when SYRIZA collapsed and capitulated. And that's perhaps one of the reasons they never came to power in their own right in Spain. And then I don't understand why, but we're begging the Socialist Party to become a junior partner in the coalition when they could have obviously had more influence from outside. But having now become a much more minor force, their leader has been taking a lead in trying to bring Netanyahu before the criminal court in The Hague, and showing very strong solidarity with the Palestinian people. Whereas in SYRIZA, the exact opposite move has happened with this former Goldman Sachs banker, a Biden delegate, not from the Biden staffer, not from even his successful campaign against Trump, but for his also ran extremely right-wing campaign in 2008 and so on. And I can't see any future for that organization. But I'd just like to ask about Varoufakis's party, why you think it fell out of the parliament, having been in it as a left voice for 4 or 5 years, if there's any way back for it. It seems that Popular Unity is a completely busted flush, but Mera seemed to have a bit more potential. And now that also Zoe Konstantopoulou's party has got in on a more sovereigntist left nationalist position, but she's taken some very controversial stances alongside the far right on Macedonia, for example. So what the situation is there, and if further splinters and breakaways will happen from SYRIZA under its almost comically, provocatively right-wing new leader. So those are just a few specific questions about the last few months since the electoral rout in Greece, but also, I suppose, as a bit of a provocation that things went as badly as possible for SYRIZA, but seem perhaps to have gone in a more healthy direction with Podemos, and that these left reformist organisations can sometimes still play a better role than the capitulationist Tsipras and his much more right-wing successor in Greece have done. So just what you think about that.
Thank you, Ian. Anybody else? Can I just point out, because one or two comments have raised it with me, the chat settings are still not corrected. They don't allow for interactive conversation between comrades, and that was a mistake. The trouble is that the person in charge of the settings is Pam, and she's not here today. I did discuss this with her, and she said that she would correct this problem. But I'll make sure that it's that from next week this is corrected. It's not that we're trying to suppress discussion between comrades. Right, anybody else asking, offering to speak?
We have a mission.
Jan.
A country that works not for the privileged and not for the few, but for every one of our citizens.
Can we switch off the musical accompaniment? Yep, Jan.
Also, just the other day, to this former Greek.
Jan, you're coming through very faint. Is there anything you can do?
Is it this better?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, that's okay.
Yes. During this last week, we have had a proposal, and it is from one self-appointed spokesperson from the Kurds in Sweden. The woman in herself is not from Sweden, but she has been in the Swedish National Parliament for the Left Party, which she left the Left Party and acted on her own. She's not just a bit of a careerist, but a lot of it. But she is also a spokesperson for the Kurdish people. In any way, she wants to be elected. That's what she wants. To the Swedish Parliament or to the European Parliament. And in order to be elected, she have gone into contact, or they have gone into contact with her, and they are the movement, or non-movement, but the organization around the former finance minister in Greece. I think it's Mera. The movement is called Mera. Anyway, we had contacts with her, and she approached us and asked us, can you collect signatures for us? Or really, can you connect, can you get signatures for me, so we can be we can stand in the election to the European Parliament. We have been discussing what should we do in this period of running up to the election in the European Parliament, because we really don't know what to do, except that we must participate some way, not in the election. There is nothing who forces us to stand in the election, but we want to be part of the election campaign. We want to participate in discussions, in debates. We want to have people out on the streets, knocking on doors, everything. We can't afford to miss that. Now, I suppose that if we wanted, we could also have a name on that ballot list together with the woman, the Kurdish woman. But and I have gathered information from Nikos about this movement. What does it mean? Because we must do something, but the problem is what should we do? Because we are too small ourselves, of course, to stand in a European election, and we don't want them to be ashamed of ourselves, and the things are very open. Unfortunately, I don't think that our signatures will help her very much, but I believe that we could be on that ballot list, and maybe it could become something that we could benefit from. I don't think that this movement will take off. I don't think so. I think that it's too little, too late. But nevertheless, it is very interesting that this former finance minister from Greece had spread his wings to Sweden through a definitely very well-known ex-left party careerist member, and asks us for help. So you see, I want to mention this because many comrades have been speaking about we live in a global world. We have these contacts like this meeting, and And now this is an example of what can take place in this in our epoch. And to me, it is very, very interesting. So I didn't want to break off the contacts with her. So we haven't even had the time to discuss it properly within our own leadership in Sweden. She just called me, and I guess Frank is participating in this meeting. I don't think you have heard about this, you either. But I haven't burned our relations with her. I haven't burned our possibility to discuss and do something. I have been sort of stalling because we need to discuss, and if somebody from Greece or anybody could comment on this situation, it would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Right, are there any more comrades who want to participate? If not, I'll ask Andros again to make some final comments.
Yes, I will be very short, comrades. I share very much Jan's view that the European elections are an opportunity to intervene, and the problem is how to intervene. Because again, we have the problem of the majority of the left organizations, let's say, not having a correct approach to the idea of the United Front. Because it would seem in Greece, for example, it would seem, let's say, basic, that after the breakthrough of the anti-capitalist left in the local elections of last year, that's only a few months ago, 3-4 months ago, this should be reflected in the European elections. But they don't agree. They cannot come to an agreement. One of the problems is MERA, or DM, Varoufakis' party. But it's not DM that has the problem. It's not Varoufakis that has the problem. It's the fact that there are divisions in the anti-capitalist left about whether to collaborate with Varoufakis. In our opinion, it's very basic. There should be an electoral alliance which should include the anti-capitalist left with Varoufakis' party, which, let's say, it's a very strange thing. I'll say a few words about it later. And there should be an electoral alliance with everybody having their independence, and the anti-capitalist left, or this, let's call it the radical left in general, would get a good percentage point to the benefit of everybody. This is not understood. And although we had hopes and we kind of put energy in it until the end of the year, until December, it seems that it's gone. And now, what will happen with Varoufakis' party that Ian asked? It's not really possible to predict, because after the failure of the party to enter parliament in last year's general elections, it's lost its dynamic. And in a sense, both DiEM25 needs the anti-capitalist left, and the anti-capitalist left needs DiEM25 to make to go forward, but they cannot meet. But Varoufakis' party has a good approach. They want collaboration with the anti-capitalist left. The problems with the anti-capitalist left. Now, why didn't Varoufakis' party enter parliament? I think it has to do with the fact that this party doesn't really have roots in the working class traditionally. The cadre of this party and the people who may back up this party don't have any traditional links to the working class. So they don't understand, how shall I say, the language of the working class. They cannot translate in the language of the working class the basic demands and how to fight for them, and, you know, what we say, transitional program. So it's more of a petit bourgeois formation with an academic at its head. He comes up with bright ideas and throws them out. So so he tries to describe the epoch that we are going through. It's not capitalism, it's techno-feudalism. And he develops this, let's say, new terminology to describe his own approach, which he says it's Marxist. But the workers don't understand what he's saying. That's a problem with Varoufakis. It's too academic. And the party, of course, is too personal. It's the party of one man. And I think these are, major reasons why the Mera-25 has failed to enter parliament and why it's in a bit of a stalemate. But as I said, Mera-25 has a correct approach in relation to a united front. They want collaboration with the rest of the anti-capitalist left, but the anti-capitalist left is divided, fighting between itself. Antarcia refuses, so it's a bit of a mess. A final question was about popular unity. Yes, popular unity is finished, as Ian has said. It's gone through multi splits, and it's gone. I mean, it cannot hope to gain some kind of mass appeal or dynamic in the next period. Despite this, there's still a significant, let's say, force in the anti-capitalist left with some good trade union presence and a few hundred of militants who are there, and they will stay because they have a kind of a class tradition. They also have a good approach in relation to United Front. They are open to collaboration, etc. But it takes more than a few to be able to collaborate, in order to create something that can develop a dynamic. So I leave it here, comrades.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrew. I thought it was a very interesting and very productive discussion. I'm afraid I have to make a rather sad announcement. Many comrades here will remember a very enthusiastic and regular participant in our meetings, Comrade Madi, who is Swedish, but who lived and worked for a long time in South Africa. I don't know, David, you knew her longer than any of us. Would you like to say something?
Yes, comrades. Look, Maddie was a good friend of mine for many decades, but I hadn't seen her for maybe 40 years. And we just happened to connect in a discussion over the use of the CIA and the South African intelligence, to blow up a good friend of ours and so forth. And we connected on that basis. And then I invited her to participate and win, and she became one of our most regular attendees, and with many sharp observations. I last saw her, she was poorly for some time, but I last saw her in Cape Town, and I was able to, watch the sunset. It's a beautiful mountain, Table Mountain, and I knew that we didn't have too long, to see her again. Maddie was a fierce anti-racist, a strong feminist, and a strong socialist, and I salute her spirit. She's been a marvelous presence, and we really miss her as she passes.
Yes, thank you, David. I would also like to say that, of course, I didn't know her for very long, but I did get to meet her in the flesh when I went to Sweden last year for a conference of the Swedish comrades in the north. She was unable to attend that conference, but she made a special point of making a trip to the Stockholm airport where I was in transit. She came to the transit lounge. We spent a couple of hours having a coffee and a talk together. And I mean, she was a really unique personality. It was really good to know her. There's one other question that I've invited Comrade Chatura from Sri Lanka to speak. It's related to the topic of the discussion. I'm sorry that I should have brought him in before calling in Andros for the final reply, but he's a representative of a very new left party in Sri Lanka called the Frontline Socialist Party, and I would like to invite him to say something about that now.
Thank you, Roger. Hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, a lot of information, and thank you for all the contributions as well. And I will, because it's coming to the end as well, so I will very briefly try to explain what we do in Sri Lanka and as a party and how we try to interact with people as well. Especially our party. In Sri Lanka as well, there are many leftist groups. So what we do, rather than looking at what political stream they are coming from, we just try to focus on the activities that we can bring different groups together. So in that, actually, we have succeeded in some areas. And especially with the struggle uprising in 2022, there were a lot of groups and individuals and a lot of leftist groups, progressive groups came together in that struggle, and they some kind of created a steering committee in that struggle in the occupied land in Colombo. So now we are playing a significant role in that as well. Now we have managed to build people's councils in Sri Lanka with a number of groups. So that's one of the things that I wanted to just to share. And especially when we as a party, we try to participate, like in this meeting, we are participating in number of number of groups in different countries as well. So what most of the times I participate then as well. What I have realized that there are a number of lot of groups, small groups, trying to get together and especially trying to fight against imperialism and this fascism together. So I can see like some different groups trying to do that, but we need to find a way to get them together and fight together. Without thinking of whether they are Trotskyist or Stalinist or Marxist-Leninist or Maoist or, without thinking of that. If we can't fight, like, for example, of course, sometimes that we should discuss thoroughly those theoretical things as well. But when it comes to like fighting imperialism, fighting fascism, and we should find a way to act together in one common platform, I think. And when we come to Sri Lanka, for example, we as a new party, we had to build our party in some areas. For example, in our country, Tamil community, we didn't have comrades, Tamil speaking comrades in that particular areas. So but we went there. What we did was, because those people, especially, they came like 200 years back from India. They were, British bought them as upcountry estate laborers. So still by today and until today, they don't have proper, like permanent addresses. They don't have houses. They don't have basic requirements for them. So what we do is we go into communities and we just, we genuinely, rather than putting our banner in front of their struggles, we genuinely go there and try to be with them and solve their problems. And through that struggle, they start realizing who we are, and they genuinely start working with them, and then we slowly give them the class consciousness as well. So in that way, actually, we have succeeded in many areas. So I'm not going to talk a lot, but I think this will help to other comrades as well, how we do things in Sri Lanka, and especially Comrade Roger, when you went to Sri Lanka, you had a chance to talk to some of our comrades as well, so might have some other information as well. So I will stop him here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chatura. We are very, very happy to be in close contact with you. As you say, I met actually 5 of the top leadership of the Frontline Socialist Party, and they expressed an enthusiasm to actually join us to work with Win. To come, we're very glad, Chatura, for a couple of years you've been coming to our meetings too, and we hope that this discussion has helped to clarify some of the issues, and we will be in constant interaction and contact with you. And we wish you all the very best, comrade. Right, next week we have a comrade from Brazil. I hope that all the comrades will come, and that we'll have another, I'm sure we'll have another very successful discussion. And all of these discussions, let's remember, are not for academic interest only, but they are a guide to action. And we hope that we're really, in these discussions, helping to build a proper leadership for the struggle, which is essential for the future of civilization itself. So thank you, comrades. See you next week.
Just before we go, Roger, could I give a brief update in relation to Comrade Marcia, who is a fighter for the security workers in Swartkoppmund and Namibia? She has passed on that that the president has died and everything seems to be a little confused in the state, but she's expecting to have a finding during the coming week. And if we're fortunate and backed by the marvelous messages of solidarity, for which I'd like to thank the comrades, we feel we have a fighting chance of her getting reinstated, which would be a major victory for workers in Namibia. We have managed to arrange some international trade unions to visit Namibia at this time, and we hope that she and other workers will be meeting them in solidarity during the coming week. But thank you again.
Yes, thank you, David, and please pass on once again our solidarity. Okay, bye, comrades. Thanks very much. See you next week.
Bye, comrades.
Bye, comrades.